Okay. Hello, my name is Jessica Burke. I'm a senior industrial engineer here at Cal Poly, and this is my project titled SkyCSR. So, just jump right in. Recap of my project. Basically, aircraft utilize broadcasts on specific frequencies to relay messages. It's used ubiquitously in the aircraft and aviation world. They use it to communicate with other aircraft, with air traffic control, and with fixed base operators on the ground. The problem is that these broadcasts have a physical limitation. For instance, when an aircraft is coming into San Luis Obispo, which is located right here, coming from the north, and they send a broadcast to the FBO to alert of their arrival, the message won't make it simply because there's a huge mountain range right here that blocks the message. So any lost messages regarding quick turns, fuel orders, rental cars, any services on the ground won't actually make it to the FBO. And then when the aircraft arrives and the FBO isn't aware of their arrival, they have to scramble to make up for the lost time. So why is it important? Well, if we miss a call from an inbound flight, we risk delaying them on the ground. And a delay on the ground is wasted money, plus a dissatisfied customer, which can turn into a lost customer. There is no other industry on earth that exemplifies the statement, time is money, better than aviation. According to Avinode, a leader in jet charter, the most popular model of private jet in 2012 was the Citation XL, a middle of the road, quote unquote, luxury jet, which took off a total of 144,302 times at the rate of 3,388 US dollars an hour. In a business where it costs nearly $57 a minute to keep the engines running, efficiency and streamlining the process is held at the topmost priority, which is why prior planning, minimal movement, and efficiency is a top goal for ground services. To begin the project, I first needed to collect some data. I created a survey for pilots and local flight schools to fill out. It incorporated how often they've been delayed due to late ground services per month, but then also asked them what they thought why the service was delayed. The perceived cause was interesting to look at later on to determine if the customer was correct in their perception or if they only saw a shallow part of the issue. From the pilot survey, there were a few perceived root causes of the ground delays. Fortunately, as you can see on the graph on the left, many of the pilots haven't been delayed too often. The majority of pilots responded that they were delayed maybe 1 to 2 times per month, and then a smaller portion responded that they had been delayed 2 to 5 times per month. The next question, as you can see on the right, addressed the reasons for the delays. Most pilots responded that they felt that the reason they had been delayed was because of a lack of people. A large portion also felt as though there weren't enough ground support equipment to meet the demands of the customer. Another significant portion, smaller than the last, but significant nonetheless, responded that their fuel order had been forgotten and never executed, which caused them to be delayed. Additional data was also collected to understand a typical day at the airport I was working at, and to understand really the volume of the fuel being sold per day, the number of aircraft being serviced per day, and so on. Interviews, time studies, and observations were recorded. The data was collected from dispatch logs, which are used at the front desk to record the times the fuel orders are called out to the line service technicians, and then the time the fuel order is completed and called back to the front desk. Additionally, I was able to get a few uplift reports from the accounting department, which gave me a really accurate number in terms of the uplifts per day and the gallons sold per uplift. These metrics didn't play so much into the web application development, but they did play a role later on in the financial justification. After the data collection, I began to develop the algorithm for the web application. This picture shows the logic behind the application when an arrival is scheduled. The application branches off into two main processes. The top process is for an aircraft that are quick turning. These aircraft receive a higher value than the aircraft staying behind for a few days. The top process, being this one right here, is for the quick turns, and then this one is for the ones staying for a couple days or that they don't need services as quickly. The next step is to calculate the value based on how many services they need to be rendered per aircraft. The services are all given weights based on the number of line technicians it takes to execute, duration of the procedure, customer satisfaction, and so on. And then the weight is calculated, assigned, which shows up on the FBO screen, which is on this side of the picture. And this is just a little bit more on the algorithm. So if somebody were to put in that they needed a Jet A GPU, which is a ground power auxiliary unit, rental car, air start, and a quick turn, the algorithm would see a weight of 6 plus 4 plus 5 plus another 4. And since they're quick turning, the entire value is multiplied by 10, which is a score of 90. So on this one, it would be ranked a high since it falls between 181 and 250. So here's the actual design phase of that web application. The first step was to schedule an arrival. The information here is all the basic information that customer service representatives typically collect when setting up an arrival for an aircraft over the phone or frequency. That's where all of this information came from. So this one is schedule of fueling. It actually was developed after the first iteration. So it was discussed that having a scheduled fueling page that was separate from the arrivals of the aircraft was based in simply for the aircraft that are based already at the airport or flight schools who just need fuel. It's basically just a streamlined version of a scheduled and arrival, and there's really no weighting algorithm because this is on a first come first served basis. So this is just the FBO profile creation page. It's not actually anything that exciting, really just the name, your username, password, telephone, frequency that they monitor, and so forth. The next page is the actual interface that you would see when the FBO logs in. So this is the scheduled arrivals page. They click on the calendar to see any of the arrivals that are scheduled for that day. If they need to communicate with a pilot, so maybe since this pilot looks like Jared Bender put in a request for Jet A and GPU, so maybe that day he comes in, the GPU's down, they can send a confirmation email alerting him that they won't have that GPU available for him, or they can say that, we've got your request, we'll see you in a couple hours kind of thing. The next page is a scheduled fueling page. It's similar to that of the scheduled arrivals page. And like I said before, it was developed after the first iteration, but this time I actually expanded it to include an interface that would allow fuelers to press the confirm and finish buttons as they process each fueling. This will alert the FBO and the customer that the fueling is complete. The first iteration was kind of an interesting test. The pilots I sat down with all have been in the aviation industry for well over 10 years. They seemed overwhelmed at the idea of having another application that they'd have to utilize to get the services needed. But at the end of the meeting, they all agreed that had this web application been integrated in with an existing application, they would absolutely use it. For a couple reasons. One of the biggest ones it seemed like was because it's kind of a cover your ass CYA maneuver, because if they don't put in one of these requests, or they say it over the phone, they don't have a way to say, I put in the request, it's your guys' fault. So that was one thing that was very appealing to them. The diagram on the screen is kind of a pictorial view of the current way fuel orders are translated from a customer to a fueler versus how they'd be communicated with SkyCSR. So the top is the customer has to telephone, email frequency into the customer service representative, who's then responsible for taking that message and radioing it out to the line service technicians. With SkyCSR, the customer puts in an order, basically it directly goes to the line service technicians, and then the customer service representatives can just kind of monitor to make sure that everything is getting done correctly. So then, as mentioned before, this is the fueling portion of the website. This is really where the line service technicians interact with the customer directly or through the SkyCSR application by getting to confirm and finish the fuelings as they happen. So then the second iteration was a little bit more qualitative. There weren't any significant changes to the design other than adding a couple controls in the left corner and making it more user-friendly, but the discussion typically revolved around the general usability and the applications that were already on the market. So the applications that we have are these four. They're all really helpful for pilots, but they do nothing in terms of an FBO trying to anticipate the needs of the aircraft. So TrackPack on the top left shows a map of inbound aircraft, as you can see here, and then it's got the tail numbers, the type of aircraft, their estimated time en route, and then the arrival time. But it doesn't say what they need on the ground, so there's not really any services or anything like that. To the right is FlightAware. It's just the free version of TrackPack, basically. It doesn't show anything other than departure airport, arrival airport, and estimated time of arrival. Right here is flightplan.com. Flightplan.com is arguably the most widely used pilot app on the market. Their ability to send information to FBOs relies on faxes. And during the second iteration, we talked a lot about this, that FBOs don't ever check their fax machines. And so even if a pilot decides to send a fax to them, the chances of the FBO getting it are very slim. So it's just not a good model. And then the second or the last one is to the bottom right. It's ForeFlight, which is a really, really cool application, but it's also exceptionally expensive. They have an option on there to view FBOs on an airfield and display like contact information and like frequencies, but they don't do anything to support the FBO. So the problem remains. None of these apps offer an FBO planning or support system. It's all purely on the pilot side of planning, which is where SkyCSR comes into play. By building that bridge between the needs of the pilot and the planning needed on the ground, we can make sure that those services that they need are timely and prompt. So finally, I added a little bit of financial justification. It's hard to quantify how much a lost customer would cost the company, but using the data collected from the accounting department, I was able to calculate some rough figures based on the averages. A single avgas customer will on average spend $185 per trip. The FBO, if the FBO was cause of a dissatisfaction, there's always a possibility that they lose that customer or that they don't visit as frequently, which can be pretty detrimental. For jets, it's somewhat of a different story. The jet typically doesn't have the same discretion that a 100 low lead customer has. So basically, jet trips are for business, which means they have to go into an airport or FBO regardless if they have a good relationship with it or not, because it's what the customer wants. Even still, the average jet brings in $1,300 in jet sales per trip, so it is important to keep them happy, and it's important to keep the reputation clean and polished. Another dimension I just kind of briefly looked at was wasted movement. So if the FBO has to scramble to get fuel or other services ready, instead of, pre-positioning them before the aircraft lands, they typically cause a lot of extra movement by the line service technicians. So for this justification, I looked at the movement between the FBO office area where the line techs hang out and the fuel trucks, which by FAA mandate has to be 100 feet away from any building. Given the number of uplifts and the distance from the FBO, the company will pay nearly $2,000 a year in just walking back and forth alone. And I just wanted to mention that there are some circumstances where they're already in the truck. So I decided to divide by 2. So I divided the average number of jet calls by the average number of 100 low lead calls by 2, which is being pretty conservative, and then multiplied it by 2 since we have 2 trucks for each one. So it's a total of 58. On a more humorous note to end with, during one of the discussions with one of the pilots, waiting was brought up. The general consensus is that pilots understand they have to wait for services. In some of the really high impact FBOs like San Jose, LAX, JFK, Washington, there's always going to be a wait. That is a well understood fact. Then a pilot brought up the fact that he knew if he knew an FBO was busy, but he still saw line techs either walking slowly or standing around, the pilot would go out of his way to make their lives miserable. Parking a plane, the example that he gave me was that he parked their plane basically in the middle of the ramp, which it's thankful that this pilot is in the outlier in terms of pilot behavior, but the larger point should be noted. If it's busy, don't look like there isn't anything to do. This plays a lot into the psychology of waiting, that people understand fairness. They will have to wait their turn, but if they're waiting and they see people who are supposed to be servicing the aircraft in the front of the line, standing around and laughing, they're not going to be happy. Okay, so that's my project. The conclusion was that the pilots, they love the idea of having something that they can do without having to call or, have the possibility of a miscommunication, but they need it to be in an application that's already existing, that's already used in the market so that they don't have to go to another application. But that is the general idea. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear back.